This meeting is being recorded.
There we go. Online, can you hear us? All right, hopefully the answer is yes.
Yes.
All right, Kevin, the floor is yours.
All right, I want to welcome everyone to the Joint Funders and Providers Council. I think we haven't had one since August, so it's good to be here together again. We can start off with the consent agenda. However, I do want to note that the consent agenda does not include the joint meeting in August minutes. So we will not be able to approve those minutes, and we'll have to do that at the next joint meeting. But outside of that, unless there's items that need to be separated from that consent agenda, I'd be looking for a motion for approval of that consent agenda. Motion.
I have a point of clarification though. So what are we being asked to vote on?
You're being asked to vote on the provider council minute, funder council minutes.
I would be willing to vote on provider council minutes. I'm not sure I can approve or vote on funder council minutes.
Well, I mean, I would need some help then from historians here on how the consent agenda is done with joint minute meetings. So when we meet jointly, do we approve previous?
We do not.
So the only minutes that really should have been in the packet is the joint
That
minutes.
is correct.
The other minutes are for information to all members. So then I'm going to redact that there really is no consent agenda because we don't have any joint minutes to approve. And those will have to be moved to the second meeting. Moving on the agenda then to our first order of business, which is the coordinated entry mobility transfer policy. This is an action item, and Susan?
Yes. Hello.
Do our presentation on that, our overview on that?
Yeah. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I'm Susan Woodland. I'm the Senior Manager of Coordinated Entry at the Home Leadership Alliance. Nice to meet you all, and thank you for being able to present this today. So the coordinated entry system plays a vital role in this endeavor to equitably, access housing resources for individuals and families experiencing homelessness within our community. And we promote housing stability for households and recognize that sometimes circumstances arise that may require a change in current housing placement. While the current policy in place has served us well, recent feedback from providers and situations I have observed myself have highlighted areas for improvement. We recognize the importance of streamlining and enhancing processes and enhancing to better meet the needs of those we serve. With respect to the agenda we have today, I would like to focus on just the key updates to the current policy. And I have drafted that are aimed at enhancing clarity, collaboration, efficiency, and equity in the transfer process with regards to coordinated entry mobility requests. So here are the key highlights of the updated changes. So in regards to the rationale that is currently in place, the rationale for coordinated entry mobility transfer has been refined to provide specific guidance on when the transfer should apply. This includes transfers between different housing program models, such as rapid rehousing to rapid rehousing to permanent supportive housing, permanent supportive housing to permanent supportive housing, and permanent supportive housing to rapid rehousing. And lastly, family shelter to family shelter. Updated procedure for service need changes specifically. The procedure for handling mobility requests due to a change in service need has been revised. This update will ensure a streamlined process for addressing participants' evolving needs and circumstances. Regarding the implementation of an internal transfer only policy, I am proposing a new internal transfer only policy to be introduced for participants enrolled in a housing program or a family shelter program who wish to transfer projects within the same agency and program model type. This facilitates smoother transitions and continuity of care for participants within the same agency. This implementation will also promote increased communication and collaboration with HMIS and coordinated entry staff. The creation of the internal transfer notification WUFU form. To better facilitate internal transfers, an internal transfer notification form has been created using our WUFU form. The form streamlines the notification process and data quality with respect to proper enrollments and ensures that coordinated entry is informed promptly. I also updated, there's been an update on mediation case conference meetings for mobility requests. So I'm proposing that Tier 3 mediation case conference meetings should now be required for specific scenarios involving mobility requests. This ensures that complex cases receive a thorough review with the appropriate players and providers. And I did also enhance questions on the mobility request form. The mobility request form has been updated to include detailed questions about the history and background information on the household or individual for which the mobility request is being requested for. This additional information improves the assessment process and helps in making informed decisions regarding mobility transfers. These updates aim to improve the effectiveness of coordinated entry's mobility transfer policy, promotes transparency and accountability amongst the COC and coordinated entry system, and ensures that participants receive the necessary support and services tailored to their needs. One thing I did not mention in my little script here, because this is my first time. So I also just want to point out that it's not only allowing that transparent and also that detailed thoroughness regarding the mandatory Tier 3 mediation case conferencing regarding the participant's sake, but it's also addressing the fact that all providers that are imperative to being at the table should a mobility transfer be approved. In my opinion, and I believe there's a consensus in the community right now with CoC providers potentially that there's been a lack of collaboration and knowledge of exactly the things that have been going on with a particular household and individual. So I feel as though the requirement of having these tier 3 case conferencing meetings with respect to specifically highlighting the mobility request is an imperative change to our process. So everyone can be at the table and any questions that may arise that might be missed in the mobility transfer request form can be talked about. That's all I have for you all today. And thank you.
All right, questions, April?
My questions really start at the beginning. So I think this is wonderful. However, with the exception of family shelter to family shelter. So family shelter is not a part of coordinated entry. So I'm just trying to find out, can you help me with that? Because coordinated entry is into housing, not emergency shelter. And so we don't have coordinated entry for families entering emergency shelter.
Great question. So I just wanted to reiterate that integration of coordinated entry with community navigation and the shelter prioritization list has been integrated to be under the coordinated entry system under me. So our shelter prioritization list, all households with families that have minor children in their home, when they are placed on the shelter prioritization list, they'll be assigned an intake and an appointment with one of our community navigators should they go through our primary access point, which is 211's homeless helpline. There are other access points. Nonetheless, to keep it short though and answer your question, when a family appears on the shelter prioritization list, it is I that actually refers those families based off of prioritization, the measures that are in place with the shelter prioritization list to those family shelters in Pinellas County. So I see where the misunderstanding might come about, but I think that there's just been this change in management and system flow that was aimed to improve the system. It has shown to improve the system, but I am now managing and overseeing the shelter prioritization list. And what I've been observing quite frequently since I became this role in managing the shelter prioritization list is that there are a lot of internal transfers happening that I'm not aware of, and this is causing and disrupting issues within the system, and there will be duplicate entries for shelters. There will also be a misunderstanding as to why one unit was available and then now suddenly it's not available. I also wanted to make that clear and concise in an actual policy where if someone is in a particular shelter, this is really more specific to St. Vincent de Paul because they have so many non-congregate family shelter programs. I at least want to know when they transfer that family to a different non-congregate or center of hope. So it's more of a notification. It's not me approving it. Does that make sense?
Your words certainly make sense. What I don't think I'm being understood, right? Okay. We are a policy making body, right? And ultimately what comes from here goes to the full the CoC board of directors. And I wouldn't be able to vote in favor of this because we currently have a coordinated entry policy that does not include the case conferencing, shelter prioritization for families to go into emergency shelter. Our coordinated entry system is for housing, not emergency shelter. So everything you've said makes sense operationally as a staff person, but from a policy standpoint, we currently have a policy on the books that coordinated entry does not include one of the populations that you have included throughout this policy.
So do you feel that it would make more sense to not include that component, particularly in this family shelter mobility transfer policy, and make it a separate one?
Correct.
Okay.
That would be my recommendation, is every place it says or shelter placement or family shelter. Number 2, that goes into family shelter. Any reference to family shelter is not applicable to our coordinated entry system currently as it stands right now.
Yeah, I mean, there is mention of it in the policies and procedures, and now that I'm overseeing it, I mean, I could see where you're coming from. It could potentially misconstrue with the purpose of coordinated entry as it was, you know, aimed to, okay, I mean,
So
Daisy,
just
what are your
remove the
thoughts?
family
Yeah,
shelter piece
so-
out of the mobility policy.
And then I'll make a separate policy and then just add it in as is.
And we'll look at it later.
Okay.
Yes.
Marianne.
For under the categories, you have imminent safety, risk, and use. Specify safety issues related to domestic violence should be referred to a domestic violence resource. But the policy itself doesn't say that domestic violence wouldn't be included in this. And so we need some caveat that we're not going to be participating in this policy.
That was in the existing policy and I didn't make any changes to it. So that was that's currently in the policy that was last approved back in 2022. We need to look at amending the current and active policy.
I would suggest, because we're not excluded from this policy and we can't be participatory in this process.
What is the date of the existing policy?
The date of the existing policy. September 10th, 2021, COC Board of Directors approval.
Without that in front of me, I can't reference the language.
Is it
Is it?
Is it somewhere I can easily access?
Now I just skimmed this. Maybe it's somewhere else in here and I'm missing it, but that's the only sentence I see that it just refers it out to DB, but it doesn't exclude us from this process.
I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to, since we are on the topic of coming up with an updated policy, and this is something that we caught with the current policy that's been in place for years. I have no issue with being specific and adding that in.
Well, I'm going to suggest we continue on with additional comments that might help refine it, because I don't see us getting to the point of approving this as it sits today, but to provide as much helpful feedback to retool it as possible.
My question is about, we've had some cases where it's not working out for particular safety reasons at a shelter, and they try, if they can, go to safe harbor as an option versus putting them all the way back out on the street. So I don't know if that pertains to this. And also, we have the issue if we have someone vulnerable on the street, either having to pay a higher cost for motel or trying to get them to stay at safe harbor for a few days until the intake bay opens for another shelter. Would this exclude being able to do that, since safe harbor is considered a shelter as well, even if they like?
I have not touched on individuals.
So this is only
the point of it, because we refer to family shelter. Coordinated entry refers to family shelter.
Okay, and maybe saying that in the first person, so that's what I was confused about. Only like the pitfall.
We don't refer to individual shelters. Like, we don't even have an individual shelter.
There's no restriction about that.
No, and honestly, this wasn't really meant to be a restriction. It was more so meant to be like a notification of, this is what's happening. We are transferring Sally from, St. Vincent de Paul GWB non-congregate to St. Vincent de Paul CHA ARPA non-congregate. This is the notification that this is happening. And then that'll allow me to kind of like just follow up with it. Like, there's no approval that comes with this. This is a notification process.
So then you would know if you're placing new people, you'd know which places that temple.
It would make more sense. It would just kind of fill in those gaps of questions on why was there a unit open 2 days ago and now suddenly there isn't because we didn't transfer. Make sense? You know?
Okay, Helen.
So I hear what you're saying, Suzanne, and I understand to a point, but I think where the disconnect is what April said. Coordinated entry is what gets people into housing. Shelter is just that shelter. I think where that would be appropriate is if how we looked at the shelter flow, right? And so if you came up with whatever rules or policies or procedures for that shelter flow, then that's where this would be appropriate. So that meeting that we have, the shelter prioritization list before, that had more people on it, because that's what we were doing, is trying to figure out how we were going to get these families into shelter. And so if we had that as a policy, I think that's where it should rest at, not in the coordinated entry side, because that doesn't get families. Getting into shelter doesn't mean you're going to get housed. It means you're into shelter, if that makes sense. So that's why it's not appropriate here, because it's not for coordinated entry. You don't. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. I know it's all under you, but
Yeah.
you're trying to fix it to where you know where families are, and we're not just shifting families, because we don't want to shift families, but it's not appropriate for coordinated entry.
So just to kind of put out a scenario really quickly, should a shelter need to request and transfer a particular family to another shelter within the same agency because of a mobility reason, right? Like, because this is also, again, specifically for mobility reasons, like underneath one of these reasons of imminent safety issue, geographic change in service need, exiting, change in family size. Should that be the reason? Should we, I guess my question is, like, should I in general have its own mobility policy with regard to the shelter prioritization list?
Mobility because this mobility and coordinated entry has to do with a program for rapid rehousing. So if I am in rapid rehousing, but that is not appropriate, or maybe this rapid rehousing, let's just say, you know, the one program isn't appropriate because they only go 6 months, and we know that this family needs a year or longer.
Okay.
And so mobility, maybe they need to be in that, or maybe they don't need to be in rapid rehousing, they need to be in PSH, and there's a PSH place available. That's what the mobility policy is. Your family shelter to shelter transfer is just for that reason. Maybe and it's, I can understand it because we fund both, right, at St. Paul. So I can understand maybe a family at a hotel is not appropriate because we need more eyes on that family. There's some things going on, and maybe they need to move into shelter. And so that's a different conversation. Yeah. Because families, just because they're in shelter, doesn't mean that they're going to be in coordinated entry, because they might not score high enough on the stat.
Right. Yeah. Okay. That makes complete sense. No, I appreciate that feedback. Thank you.
Anyone else? My question is regarding, I can appreciate the process here. Where is the authority aspect of decision making on the mobility transfer? It sounds like it's coordinated entry would approve or deny the mobility transfer.
Yes.
But you have permanent supportive housing to permanent supportive housing and permanent supportive housing to rapid rehousing. When you get to permanent supportive housing, there's all kinds of other factors that play, legalities, leases, and things like that. So the way this reads is the coordinated entry could approve a mobility transfer from permanent supportive housing to rapid rehousing or to other permanent supportive housing. But how would that happen if they're housed with leases? Usually other things drive that process, evictions and other kinds of factors.
Yeah.
So what's the intent there?
The intent is that I've been receiving a lot of households or individuals that are currently housed in permanent supportive housing that are getting forced out of their permanent supportive housing unit and close to on the street. And they need a special mobility request to get them transferred if there is no way that they can stay at that current unit within that permanent supportive housing program. Another thing that I've been seeing is there have been a great amount of mobility or VI SPDATs that are being done on in participants, participants that are currently housed in a permanent supportive housing unit to get placed back onto the prioritization list. And I need to be able to have a policy in place that says that there's a reason why they're VI SPDATing them, because they are at risk of getting forced out, or it's a safety issue. For example, I'm having one with HEP right now where a VI SPDAT was completed so they can be looked at for CASA domestic, for CASA PSH. There was another encounter or situation that occurred for someone that is getting forced out and needs to vacate that unit to a different permanent supportive housing program because of issues that have been happening there, and it being safety reasons for other tenants, right? So like, it's just kind of, I feel like I want to be able to assist with that process. And if they are close to being forced out on the street and there needs to be some kind of transfer because of a mobility reason, I mean, who else is going to be able to help triage and assess that for that to come to fruition?
So I think what we would be doing is just a coordination plan. To your question, Kevin. It should be the participants or those providers that would be the ultimate people who will say yes or no. I think we're just going to assist with the facilitation of the case conferencing and that request. So we should adjust or mention there that the providers will be the ones that will decide. We would just coordinate.
Okay.
So you're saying it was family, but I heard a lot of individuals in those examples. It is just this is family, or
no? That would be for both. The reason why I was specific on the family is because I refer to them as shelter. For families for shelter.
Okay, so the policy includes both, but the shelter part only pertains.
Yes, but I agree with Helen and April as far as taking that out and having its own policy, integrating that elsewhere. I mean, do we feel like coordinated entry, like being that facilitator in transferring someone from a permanent supportive housing unit to another would be inappropriate? Because if that's the case, again, I think we just have to coordinate.
Kevin, I would make a motion that we table this discussion until a revised policy specific to coordinated entry is put either before Funders Council or Providers Council. It doesn't have to wait until we collectively are back together again.
Right.
I think per policy
it can go to provider.
Correct.
I have a motion from April and a second from Helen. All in favor of that, say aye. Any opposed? Motion passed. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think it's a good start towards a process that probably is needed here. We look forward to the modifications and continue to work on this. Okay, next on the agenda is priority population. So although we weren't able to approve minutes from the joint meeting in August of the Providers and Funders Council, as a quick summary, one of the main takeaways from that last joint meeting was establishing priority populations for funders. And the Funders Council at the last meeting spent a lot of time on this, and then also established a subcommittee.
You mean Providers Council?
Sorry, Providers Council, a subcommittee to work on this and come to a providers agreed upon priority population list. And so we come to the meeting today with that for discussion and approval. Here. So I'll read it as agreed upon by Provider Council members. Households with the following vulnerabilities and or risk factors: life-threatening health conditions and mobility conditions, severe and persistent mental illness or substance use disorder, domestic violence within the past 3 years, risk of harm and exploitation, disproportionately represented minority groups, length of time homeless, veteran reentry status within the past 3 years, with the following additional population priorities. Number 1, families with minor children. Number 2, older adults 62 and older. Number 3, chronically homeless households. And number 4, youth 18 to 24. Need me to repeat that? I can.
I'm also typing it on the screen.
Priority groups, I know we've talked about using these as funding priorities when we establish here. Is it also, I know we don't have a prioritized ability for individual access to shelter. That does do any of these filter down into shelters policies for prioritization on who's getting access to beds?
We would hope so.
Yeah, I mean that would be the intention.
Or we would hope so, right? That if you look at VI SPDAT, right? And I'm assuming everybody here has reviewed the VI SPDAT, right? I think there's only one question that's actually about homelessness. What the VI SPDAT is attempting to establish is vulnerability, right? And how vulnerable are you if you are living on the streets? So the majority of the risk factors that we have struggled over the years, we've struggled with risk factors because I want to use the word everybody wants a risk factor to be the priority population as opposed to understanding it as a risk factor. So what we've done is we've identified all the risk factors, which really is the vulnerability index, right? These risk factors is what would make somebody more vulnerable if living on the street. And so we've taken those risk factors into account in these 4 priority populations. So if you're families with minor children and you have severe persistent mental illness, domestic violence in the past 3 years, risk of harm or exploitation, right? You're automatically within that one population of families with minor children. The more risk factors you have within that group raises you up higher on that vulnerability scale. So we were asked to do this predominantly so funders could make decisions around how they're prioritizing funding, right? But to your question, I think, and to your point, what we would hope, right, is that we're all using, and I think for the most part, shelters are using the VI SPDAT, right? Once you're in the shelter, right, a VI SPDAT is going to be conducted unless you're getting a VI SPDAT from a street outreach or something like that. Am I answering your question?
Yes, and I know there's been HUD regs, right, that we can't prioritize if there's capacity in the shelter system like we can for families to access shelter, right? So
I don't even think that's a HUD rule. I think that's a community rule. Like that's been decided that we don't prioritize individuals for shelters. The family shelter prioritization list came about, you know, because of, I mean, I'm pretty sure I wasn't here, but it was during COVID, I believe, shortly after it started, because of the increase in family homelessness population. So that's why we created that family flow. But for individuals, we don't have a prioritization list for shelters. The VI SPDAT for individuals is to prioritize for rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing.
Which brings us back to kind of the first conversation we were just having a minute ago, which is coordinated entries for housing, permanent housing, rapid rehousing, those kinds of things. And emergency shelter does not fall under coordinated entry. There is a family prioritization case conferencing system that we put in place, not because of the increase in families due to COVID, but rather because we have very little emergency shelter beds for families. We have very, very little. And some of them come at a cost, right, to a provider who's placing a family there. And so there was a lot of back doors, you know, as opposed to vulnerability or prioritization that was contributing to a problem. Really, really vulnerable families remaining on the street and others who were getting into shelter because they happened to call on the right day, right? If you called where's Mickey? If you called 211, people were getting a shelter list, and then families had to start calling those shelters, right, to get in. So in any case, this is predominantly for funding decisions, but we would hope that this is going to continue to push down and that we're all working towards the same priority populations and risk factors. I do want to point out that when we use the word mobility, we are literally talking about mobility. So on the prior policy that was put before us, the word mobility is being used completely differently than we are using mobility here. So what we are particularly concerned about are people who are non-ambulatory, in particular are 62 and olders. And
should we change that to ambulatory conditions?
Perhaps if we're going to use mobility on this other thing, that means something completely different.
So to that extent, just thinking about having funders and providers here, we've seen a huge need where there's limited beds that are literally accessible for people with limited mobility. And that, I think, needs to be one of the funding priorities of how we improve the ADA accessibility for shelter.
Maybe we say that instead of ambulatory, maybe we say accessibility. Are using the same term.
Because we agree, Era, that is exactly the point that we were trying to capture in our discussion here.
And they're somewhat vulnerable, but
absolutely
trouble finding spots. So
absolutely
get out of the tent, for example.
Exactly, absolutely.
Other questions about this list or concerns? Is it clear? I mean, we're at a point, we spent a lot of time on this, and we're bringing forward here for approval of this priority list, from both provider and funders.
So this is coming out of committee. It just requires a second. So I will move that we accept what has come out of Providers Council for priority populations.
All right, so we have a coming from committee. We have a second on that. All in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passed. Well, April was the second from the committee. Committee motioned it, second from April. Passed by all. All right, thank you. That was less painful than I thought it was going to be, but I think we did spend a lot of time, and I think getting providers on the same page and agreement with this allowed us this to happen the way that it is. Okay, moving forward to a pretty big topic here on the anti-camping law is our next item of business. This is an information item. However, this is a very important information item for this group because we were facing this active change in law, and Daisy and Lieutenant Case are here to kind of kick this off.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. So we have been having some conversations with the Sheriff's Department regarding some of the, I guess, early tactics of how we want to assist clients who are literally on the street. I haven't been able to include a lot of the community providers as of yet. However, we had 2 meetings. The previous meeting, I had brought this up because I think it's very important for us as a community to get together and figure out how we will tackle this, not just one siloed department or provider, right? So theirs has been, one of my concerns, or one of the questions that I had when I was in that meeting is the Sheriff's Department has a really good idea of how we're going to get clients off the streets and into a shelter or a safe area. However, my concern is what are we doing to exit the clients into some permanent housing or rapid housing, permanent supportive housing situation. And I think this is where we have to come together to figure out what that solution looks like, all the players that we need to get involved. There was a timeline that I wasn't able to share, but we will be sharing, or Lieutenant Haitian, at some point we will be sharing that timeline.
I'll touch on
yeah, you can talk about that a little bit. So there is a particular timeline on how we want to approach, or how the Sheriff's Department wants to approach the law that is going to be implemented October 1st. However, restrictions won't happen until January 1st of 2025. So we wanted to kind of bring that up today. And I know Lieutenant Hish has a little bit of more information that he wants to share as well.
So the new law is coming, it's signed, it's happening, but there's not really room for debate, unfortunately. It's happening. Education takes place, according to the law, education takes place from October and then through the end of the year, and then enforcement becomes applicable starting January 1. The sheriff's position on this and why he got some providers, some agencies together ahead of time and started spearheading this is that nothing's changed from before Safe Harbor opened. He doesn't want this population running the risk of getting arrested, and he doesn't want this population in the streets. So we are going to go back to a plan of kind of street outreach thing. We're going to do education over the summer. We're going to educate over the summer and really encourage this population to take advantage of going into shelter and getting into Safe Harbor. We will, Safe Harbor will take on the role of feeding the individuals that are appropriate for the other shelters into the other shelters that are appropriate. But because Safe Harbor's a 24/7, 365, we're always open and willing to take in. That's going to be the main entry mechanism for our outreach caseworkers that are going to be out there. Once that takes effect, we're going to look at, how soon we want to get ahead of it. All right, let's speak freely. All right, let me speak freely real quick. This population, our area sees an influx, or has our population that's currently here. Nobody really wants to come to Florida when it's hot to become homeless. Everybody wants to come to Florida to become homeless when it's October, November, December, January. So we're going to do a good job, and we're going to have this portion of our population that's currently on the street educated on the risk of being arrested under the enforcement piece of this Florida state statute. But what we got to be ahead of is waiting for that influx of people coming down from up north when it gets cold. So the street outreach piece is not going to just stop once the law goes into effect, and we're going to start arresting everybody. That is not the sheriff's response to this law. That is not what he wants done. He doesn't want this population in jail. He doesn't want them on the street. So we're going to educate, try to encourage them to take advantage of the shelter that's available to them. So we'll keep that engagement going throughout as we pick up more individuals from other areas into our area. Come to the cold months. We are going to, and the posting went out just before I walked into this meeting. We'll be hiring those 2 positions. So it's posted on our internal website, and I believe we'll be posting it externally for some social workers to backfill those positions. Once we get through, probably Daisy touched on this a little while ago. Once we get through the beginning of June and we have an idea, each city of Wisconsin, major cities I've already talked to the majority of them. They're going to get out and start working in those public areas and identify how many people each night that they have sleeping. And we're going to do this for the next couple of months and just get a real handle on how many people are sleeping in the public places every night. Once we have that, we'll have a better idea of what we're doing. I think as the summer rolls on, we'll open up that meeting to other providers to try to see who can come in and assist with what they have. What did I miss?
The educational flyer that we were discussing, I think there was some issues with the flyer and the information that was being sent out?
Yeah, it's gonna be real simple. At first, me and Victoria and Daisy and somebody from our IT department had really intricate flyers drawn up, and we are going to scale it back, and it's basically gonna say, please don't get arrested. Here's the information on how to get Safe Harbor. Let's get you there, get off the street. We don't want anybody to run the risk of catching a criminal charge. So we'll have those, I believe the idea is to have those completed by May 17th and then sent out for review, and then we'll be hitting the streets with those and handing those out beginning of June, first week in June.
I just have a question. I have a couple questions. I'm sorry.
For Daisy, right?
Well, I'm gonna have a motion in a minute. I'm gonna have a motion in a minute because I hear what you're saying, but I think something more needs to be done, and I think it needs to be COC led. And anyway, but my one question for you, Zach, is so the people that come down that are not ours right now, they can stay in Safe Harbor for 3 days. Right? You're not a Carrollton County resident, you got 3 days. Can you help us understand how that will work?
Let's see how it goes. Everything in Safe Harbor is written in gray. Right. Nothing black, nothing white. But I don't want to figure that out right now.
And well, but I think because as we're out educating people, we want to educate them. Like if you're not from, I want true education. If you're not from this area, you can go to Safe Harbor for 3 days. That's what we've been telling people. That's what people know. And so I want to give true information. And I also have some concern with the capacity. I think there'll be some additional capacity, right? Because we know that Safe Harbor can only safely hold based off of what we've heard, the 300 people. But also, like, I get a list, I get a spreadsheet every single week. We're at 90% capacity. I think, quite frankly, I know that we don't have true numbers on this spreadsheet of what the capacity is, because right now Safe Harbor says 470, which is not safe, right? And I know we don't want to reduce those numbers because of the hit, but it's a real conversation that we need to have because we don't have that capacity. We truly don't.
Right.
Not safely.
So, and your question that I don't have an answer to yet leads me into another piece of something that I'm going to put out today, and it's just going to have to be, in order to keep this population out of jail and run them the risk of going back to the street. Emergency shelter providers, us included, not all of it, not just us. Everybody's going to have to really look at how people are exited, discharged, transitioned, whatever you want to call it. We got to make sure that we're not transitioning people back into the street, because if they stay at somewhere for 94 days. And then they don't have a plan, and they walk out the door and they go back to sleep in Williams Park for 3 nights and they go to jail. That doesn't solve anything. We're just, I don't want to say kicking this can down the road because that's not right, but we are literally just kicking this can down the road, and we're all going to have to come up with a way. And that's why Daisy was saying it's going to be, it's going to have to be somebody else's responsibility to pick up how this population is permanently housed.
Well, but my motion would be, I mean, I don't know who that's going to be, but my motion would be that the COC convene a municipality meeting to determine what this looks like who's going to tackle this. Right now, you have the county, the city, like we're funding. There are other municipalities that are funding as well, but we need to all be together on the same page.
That was a conversation we had.
Well, so, I mean, that would be my motion, that it happens, that we're not just still having this conversation, that it actually, that the COC convenes this municipality meeting and you lead this charge on what is needed, where that funding is coming from. I hear you saying rapid rehousing. Right now you have very little rapid rehousing. We went from 11 to very minimal rapid rehousing for individuals, right? And the biggest one that is being funded is the HOLAB with the county and the city of St. Pete at $400,000.
And they don't have capacity for all the people coming in.
we need other funders at the table. So that would be my motion, is that the COC.
I second the motion. And as a part of the discussion, I will just say that prior to your arrival, Daisy, this conversation has already been had, which is to say that the COC needs to lead this effort. My observation is that the sheriff has stepped up because of a lack of leadership elsewhere to address this problem. And if we as a community, or certainly as a COC, are going to defer to a law enforcement model of addressing our homeless population, right, then many of us who've been at this table for close to 20 years, it will have been for naught. So I've read the outline, right, that was provided at the meeting that you're referencing. And we will be arresting individuals, right, who are public camping. We will be rounding them up and taking them to safe harbor. And then eventually by August, we're arresting. And then the only way out of jail is to agree to go to safe harbor as a jail diversion program. I mean, that by definition is jail diversion. So I understand that we go back and forth on whether it's an emergency shelter or it's jail diversion or somehow it's jail diversion for the homeless. I don't know what it is at this point anymore, but I do know that when push comes to shove for the sheriff, and he has been clear about this, it will be a jail diversion program. And so people who are being arrested will be able to, right, once their TV and phone and other things are taken away for a period of time and they're in jail, they will agree to go to safe harbor. Ultimately, the question is then what? Right. So if we have a capacity issue at safe harbor right now, and they're only staying for 3 days, according to some material that we got, right? They are only willing to stay for 3 days. So now they're going to be willing to stay for 3 years. I mean, where are they going in order to exit, not to the streets, but to permanent housing, right? So there's a whole different conversation that needs to be taking place other than the criminalization of being homeless, right? So we need some leadership on that. Again, I don't know what providers were there at this meeting?
The county, City of St. Pete, City of Clearwater, County, City of St. Pete, City of Clearwater.
Yeah, so those are funders as opposed to providers, in any case, right? So we need a convening. That this legislation is happening here and across the country. We are not unique, if you will, to this legislation. However, what I can tell you is that there are dozens of cities who are so far beyond where we are in trying to actually solve the problem. And getting rather creative. And so I don't know what the cost of this would be. If I were to give it a number, it's going to be $4 million. We're opening an entire wing in a jail. We've got to increase the capacity at Safe Harbor. There's going to be a cost to that. It's like, well, why aren't we talking about investing that same, whatever that dollar amount is? Let's invest that same dollar amount into some creative, innovative. I mean, I don't think Pinellas Hope is here. It's like, where's Pinellas Hope? We need Pinellas Hope at the table. There's a variety of people who need to be included in these conversations. I understand that decisions can get made real quick when you got 5 people at a table, but we can't do that. We simply can't do it. And without us, then that alternative that has just been presented is what's going to take place. And so I think we need to get busy fast.
And I wasn't quiet about that either during that meeting. So it's not that I agreed totally to what that was happening.
And just to be clear, April, I agree with like 99% of everything that you said. You're absolutely right. The criminalization piece of this, if that's what you want to call it, it's the unfortunate piece of. I'm using your words.
Yeah, it is my word. What else would we call it? We're going to criminalize people who are homeless.
It is the last case scenario that the sheriff wants to do, which is why we're doing this education piece. We don't have a lot of time. I don't hear, just like you, I'm not sure of any other providers or anybody else that's come up with a plan to solve this before October 1 when this goes into effect.
Listen, I greatly respect and value and appreciate Sheriff Galtieri. So don't misunderstand me in any way, shape, or form. What I believe is that Sheriff Galtieri, who often takes a leadership role, especially in the absence of leadership, because he's not going to wait around, because he's a leader. And so he literally is just going to step in and fill the void. What I'm saying is that filling the void with a criminal justice mechanism is we've got to be better than that in this community for the people that we care so much about. And so I haven't been invited to a meeting. I attend 72 meetings a month on behalf of the COC, and yet I haven't been invited to a meeting. And so unless I'm invited to a meeting, right, to be a part of this discussion, well, then you're going to hear from me, because we can't allow this to happen because we aren't all invested in coming up with a solution. Do I have a solution as I sit here? Absolutely not. But I know that jailing people and the only way out is to agree to go to safe harbor, and then I can't get you out of safe harbor is probably not going to be the answer. So, I think there's a lot of people who need to be at this table. I don't know if every municipality, how many do we have? 23, 26, 24? So have all of them agreed to allow the policing of their streets, rounding up people who are public, camping, and then we're all taking them to.
So the majority of the chiefs have been involved in the conversation.
And they've all agreed?
No, not to my, I don't know.
Okay.
Not to my knowledge.
There is a city manager's meeting. Actually, there's one this Friday. I think it happens monthly with most of the city managers. I don't know if the city administrator comes to that as well, but that might be a good, executive administrative level to present to on that, because I come to funders and I can share my piece up down here on the protocol, but to hear the facts and the impacts, I think is very good, that there's a cost either way, and figuring out where we want to invest. Yeah, jail expansion, or figure out another solution and pose it to them, because I don't think they're aware that there's a financial impact for them to not do more than they're doing.
That's a great opportunity to sit in a city managers meeting. That is a really good opportunity to get people who can make some decisions and have them hear the impact. Mm-hmm. But I'm saying that the COC should lead that.
So we have a motion and a second on the table for the COC to call that meeting. Is there any additional discussion needed to be added to this?
The only other thing I'll say is that I do know that I think it was the diocese, the St. Pete Catholic diocese. I'm not sure if I'm getting that right. It may have been even a larger group. In any case, they convened recently, and the minute I heard, I was invited to that convening, but because this issue was not being discussed in that convening, I elected not to attend. But it is that kind of convening that needs to occur to address this issue. And I reached out to Kathleen at the time, and I said, right, we need to, I don't know how they created that agenda for that convening. That certainly would have been the time. In any case, so I just want to make sure we're defining this convening and the leadership that we're asking for the COC or the HLA on behalf of the COC to provide is significant.
Yes.
Well, and I'll add as chair of the COC, so I was not invited or informed of the two previous meetings. And so Daisy was there, and I will make it a point to be there beside her. And reach out to the sheriff and say, I'm hesitant to reach out and say, I want to be there. I don't want to ask permission.
I've already informed
and be there. But I think, Lieutenant Hayes, one of the things that I find, most concerning is the statement about, well, first of all, you're out there educating before our next meetings, educating people about what? What are you telling them?
They can go to Safe Harbor.
You need to get your butt out of homelessness and either go to Safe Harbor or you leave our jurisdiction. And so that was a little concerning. But the other thing is, so that we don't have to deal with you when the law goes into effect October 1st. But then the other thing is, and I know you know that this isn't about you for sure, but it's like exiting them from Safe Harbor, wherever they happen to be, which we don't, you talk about other providers have to get on board and have shelters. There isn't any. And so exiting them to where is somebody else's problem. We're all here. I mean, I don't know where the miracle answer is, but we all need to be at the table before we start calling people into Safe Harbor about where are they going to go and how are we going to get them to permanent housing, rapid rehousing, supportive, whatever.
So the sheriff's office is looking at this
That's right.
Let's look at it from the law enforcement perspective.
That's right.
This law goes into effect, and it says that people with a gun and a badge got to arrest this population if they're in the park overnight sleep. That's $152 a night in jail. That is an astronomical expense that nobody should have to burden, and nobody should have to, because we can do better. We don't want to shoulder that burden. We don't want this population incarcerated. That's the smallest lens that we're looking at this through. The biggest lens is, I don't know any other sheriff's offices in the country that are spending $2.5 million a year to keep the shelter open, to keep this population out of their jail. We are doing everything as the sheriff's office that we possibly can and spending every dollar that we can get our hands on to make sure that this population doesn't go to jail. This is more of a social service problem once we get them sheltered. Right. We are not a social service provider. We are a law enforcement provider that also has social services attached to it. So that's what I'm saying when I say those things.
When you talk about education though too, and I don't want to belabor this, but I mean, I'm hoping there's a family of 3 who comes and says, look, I'm homeless. Where are you going to put me? Where are you going to put me tonight? And we have what, 141 families out there waiting for shelter? So where are they going to go when a business or resident says, I don't want to see that out my window? Where do we take them?
So they're on private property. They're on private property. We're merely educating the public.
So I tell them, go sleep in Coachman Park. You're down there in Coachman Park, and now somebody calls. Where do we take them? But when you call the police and say that's against the law, I mean, that's the conversation.
And that's where this conversation absolutely needs to lead to. Yeah. I'm not the answer for it. The sheriff's office is not the answer for it. The people sitting in this room are.
Yeah.
But I completely agree. Yeah. We have 3 months to work it out. I get what you're saying. We have 3 months to figure it out.
That's where convenience will help though, because funders need to fund, and it can't just be it can't just be one set here, one set there. I mean, we just opened up 25 more spaces at Pinellas CoC. We fund Pinellas CoC to $215,000 a year. We just added another case manager. Has to be other funders. Our rapid rehousing program that we're funding is for the whole entire county, yet there's the county and the city of St. Pete funding it. There has to be more funders at the table for everyone. We check to Safe Harbor every year. It's $150,000. It's an MOU that is already done. There has to be more funders at the table that are willing to fund these the way out, as well as the shelters, right? So family shelters as well, but there has to be someone to help them get out.
What do you think the likelihood, because you all have been here longer than me, of getting those non-entitlement cities, all 24 municipalities at the table with a checkbook?
I think it's going to be harder than, than perhaps people think it is going to be. But again, to I think Lieutenant Haish's point, right? This is a statute, right? This is now law, will become law. So what has historically not motivated those 23, 22 others will probably now motivate they get one lawsuit and they're going to be spending a whole lot of money trying to defend that suit. So, you know, I think it's going to be easier than historically it has been, but it might take a lawsuit before they're willing to come to the table. Arrow has her hand up.
So I think the city of Miami or Miami Beach, they use a % of their tourism tax to fund it. And the other option maybe, I mean, I know this was on 3-month tax, but consider an MSTU tax that is proportionate throughout the whole county for something like that. Municipal services, where it's that then go into a fund for some of those services throughout the county. My other question is though, right now a lot of the shelters have that 90-day stay period, and so I think that's one of those other items. Obviously, we want that incentive for people to be working on their housing plan and exit. But what if they're not working for that? And then what happens at the end of that? And right now, I think they're mostly not allowed to then transfer to another program. Or if they've been in that shelter for 90 days, they have to wait a year before they can return again. So that restricts the amount of available beds for somebody that's already been there and done that.
Again, not to mention all the things that we talked about at the very beginning, right? Coordinated entry and priority populations, right? The elderly are the fastest growing homeless population across the country and here. I think we've seen a 446% or something. Non-ambulatory issues, as we've talked about in particular with the elderly. So even if we had the capacity, let's just say, which we do not in some fantasy emergency shelter, location. It doesn't address families. It doesn't address the elderly, mobility issues, severe and persistent mental illness, addiction, you know, the list, right? Domestic violence, all the list that goes on. So, you know, I don't think we can convene soon enough. And this is a large task.
During the point in time, in one of those camps down in St. Pete, Helen, you were there with me when we talked to everyone sitting in that parking lot. Not one of them, at least to me that I talked to, said that they were there because they couldn't get into Safe Harbor. They said they were there because they weren't willing to part with their pet. They weren't willing to get rid of their personal belongings because they would be stolen. That they prefer the privacy and quietness of being there versus being in a shelter. Those were the top three things that were I heard and wrote down on paper and shared in that moment. And that is the population that we're talking about right now. That was just one site. And there's more.
Yeah, so again, I think we've all heard those very same things, that if we were making an investment, if really it's Safe Harbor is the answer, and we're taking everybody to Safe Harbor, and everybody's going to be able to remain at Safe Harbor until we can find them permanent housing. And let's assume all that's true, then we should be investing in public storage, climate control public storage. We should be investing in animal shelters, so to speak, and safe places for animals and pets to go. We should be investing in the things that we know, right? Because this isn't our first rodeo, and we all work with people who are living homeless, and we know why. So we probably, you know, shouldn't operate it with, you know, badges and guns either. But, you know, if we have to do that, then at the very least, we need places for them to safely store and their belongings and their pets. And
I think the capacity thing that Helen mentioned is huge, because your 470 is fire code capacity. It is not safe capacity or factoring in trauma-informed design or how much space is reasonable for someone to have trauma in their background. So
right.
I don't think we've had that assessment of what the capacity is from a trauma-informed standpoint. Sure, it's less.
I mean, he said it several times. I think as a community, we're just, we don't want to change the numbers because of our hate, because it's $100, whatever, but we got to be real about what we have, because otherwise we create problems for ourselves.
What is the capacity of B wing? So if B wing has to be opened, what's the capacity of B wing?
Go up
to 270 safely was at
Safe
Safe
Harbor.
Harbor.
Oh, it's Safe Harbor.
300?
Yeah, 300.
So 390. You said B wing, so if you all together.
Nobody wants to do that, so I'm not entertaining it.
I know, but I'm just being real about, let's just be real about that number. Let's just say that, right? And we have 2144 was our number, was our total number for 2023 point in time.
Right. So again, right, we're all just sitting here looking at each other. I mean, so do the math, right? I mean, like.
I just, and I keep saying things to Lieutenant Hayes, like, so let's say we solve the money, we get that, we still don't have the capacity anymore. What are we going to do? Are we going to reopen the chip building? Clearwater doesn't want that. Are we going to, you know, I mean, what are we going to take over some empty schools somewhere? I mean, these are the only, we got to come up with those even options that no one's going to want also.
But if you don't have the money at the table,
right, I understand, but
no option.
Well, we don't even know what we're asking for money-wise if we don't have the option to say, all right, we're going to take over, what's the school in Lealman that's been empty for a while? You know, and what could we do in this school? And this is what it's going to cost to do that. Because what are we asking for?
But I think it's a question though, you know, like we needed to know, I think if you ask the question, so I needed to know what would it cost me to open up 25 more spaces at Pinellas CoC. I called Joe and said, what's going to cost me? What is it going to, we fund you all $150,000 already. Tell me, do you have capacity on your grounds to give me 25 more spaces and what's it going to cost? He gave me a number, we took it to council and we did it. That's what I mean about having the funders at the table and having that conversation. What is it gonna cost? We don't know, because we're not asking, only certain funders are asking providers, what is it gonna cost to make this space available? But if everybody that has some vested interest in this, which is our whole municipality, because we've got unhoused neighbors everywhere, the whole county, right? If everybody had to have that conversation, or else they're gonna get sued and it's gonna cost them money in another way, then I think that we could have some real conversations, and if we're real about our data and our capacity and what we can truly do. That's why I'm saying that the COC needs to say, hey, let's have this conversation, and I need everybody at the table, people that can make some decisions. Because I get it, if you don't know if you don't have a place where they're gonna go, but you don't know because you haven't asked.
Well, people that have those resources.
Right.
Every municipality has, financial resources.
Well, not just the financial resources, but the physical assets.
Right. I mean, that's where I come back to is I think let's just.
I don't have
we can come up with the financial part of it.
Building that can house 200 people.
But maybe you got a building that can house 125. Or maybe
there's
there's
churches that have been sold in Clearwater. Two churches recently sold that we had looked at.
That's
4
right.
years ago.
That's
Right,
right.
but I'll go back to the example there, Kathleen, is, we've been working with St. Vincent de Paul, with some programming at the old Chips building. They have a new roof on it, it has new air conditioning. But the whole idea for Clearwater, sorry, Chuck, I'm not trying to get like any daggers at me here, is they, the investment that they made in Safe Harbors because they didn't want to have that near neighborhoods. And so, because if we do a school, we're in a neighborhood. If we do any of these options, because we're in Pinellas County, this is the thing that drives me crazy about this thing we were at yesterday. You know what? Where there's land, you can build something at least. We don't have land. So what are the options? Because if you're right, if we can figure out the money side, okay, whatever.
But Michael, I think if because the rules of this game have just changed.
I know.
I think because the rules of the game have changed, that people are going to come with perhaps a different perspective, a different tolerance, a different willingness to try to find the solution. And if not, they're going to have one lawsuit, and then their appetite will for sure change because it is going to be very, very costly. And again, I think we all have to remember that what I'm hearing on the streets is that it is in fact people who are living homeless who are going to be convening and the first to file suit. So while the statute is allowing, and I think maybe even tilting towards, that it's homeowners and businesses and others who are being impacted by these issues, I am hearing that it is people who are living unhoused chronically who are going to be convening and filing suit. I want to call a question. We have a motion in a second.
Open a second.
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Sorry, Ara, the motion was for the COC to convene a meeting.
Okay.
With funders, providers, all hands on deck.
So is your guidance as soon as possible? Or is it next month? Lieutenant H, do you have a next meeting on the calendar for that week that's already in place?
No, we don't have one yet.
Do you have on the timeline, is there something that's supposed to start mid-May? Education or any of that stuff?
No, nothing's gonna kick off until at least June. First week in June is when the education piece will be built in, and we'll have social workers hitting the street to educate.
Motion is as soon as possible. Any opposed?
Yeah, do you want a date? Because I can modify it. Are you asking for a
Or
date?
like, I would say, guidance about, I think as soon as possible is good, but if you want to put it, by the.
I don't want as soon as possible to be like, oh, well, I can only get everybody together.
In August.
Yeah. So, it's May already. And we've definitely got to start educating before the education even starts, right? So
By the end of May?
By the end of May.
Motion agenda.
I agree to that. I'll second that.
All right, we have a motion to convene by the end of May 31st.
Can I mention that May 31st is the 5th Friday of the month? So there probably aren't a ton of meetings scheduled for May 31st as is. It is a Friday. That's the week before. So it's not Memorial Day. I'm just going to throw it out there. I'll send scheduling to everybody to get it actually on the books and whatnot, but I do want to throw it out there. I just did look it up. That is the 5th Friday of the month. So I'm guessing that there are not a ton of meetings scheduled.
I feel like the Funders Council has their meeting on the 31st.
On the 5th Friday?
I remember.
There's
Roof
nothing.
Is it city management?
If you look at the minutes.
This is a meeting for municipal leaders and providers and relevant stakeholders.
And we're talking all 24 municipalities.
Hopefully, I do think that'll be a big ask for this month, but if it's the committee's goal, then we'll make it our goal too.
All municipalities.
Yeah.
They can all be sued.
Yeah, so we'll look at dates and we'll send out some scheduling stuff, but I do just want to flag that as a possible date for everybody while we're sitting here.
So are we looking at a recurring meeting? Because I don't think we'll accomplish everything in one meeting. And so should we commit to a regular cadence? So that, for example, if we can't get them all to the table just quickly, already put together a cadence of what the meeting will be so that we can try and get more at the next meeting?
You think like every 2 to 3 weeks?
Yeah.
I mean,
Minimum.
I mean, think of it as we did the jurisdiction meeting. So yeah, I would think so. I mean, we're meeting. When we started the jurisdiction meeting, I mean, we needed to figure out what happened with money, what to do with money, and how to budget. So we need to figure this out.
And I think with remote capability, I mean, people can come together.
Okay, so just for the sake of my scheduling purposes, is that bi-weekly then or weekly that we were looking at? Bi-weekly, okay, thank you. Sorry, just want to make sure I have it down.
Can I just ask a clarifying question, Lieutenant Haish, on because it was my understanding that by like next week, the areas of responsibility that law enforcement was, every law enforcement agency was reporting to you, their populations that are living outside or sleeping outside, and that the education and or the, what I'm going to call policing of those areas was beginning as early as this next week or 2 weeks.
We're not policing anything. We're counting. We're not doing anything until June, and our social workers are trained and ready to go, and the committee has agreed upon these informational flyers, and we've got people in place. We're not doing anything until that. We're literally just getting an idea. We're tasking law enforcement with getting an idea of how many people do you have sleeping on public land.
Okay, so I misunderstood that role, that aspect of it. So what you're saying is you are going to be collecting that data right now, beginning next week or whatever, but we're not doing anything with that data until you have 2 social workers in place and there's.
Well, and that data will be critical for the meetings that we're setting.
And if I also understood you correctly, the education component, you're also going to be providing flyers so that we can have a consistent message if we.
And if we see a consistent place where we know there's people congregating, we'll drive the van down there and every day pick anybody up who wants to go to Safe Harbor, throw them in the van and bring them up.
Do we include street outreach staff members in that, because they need to know what they need to tell their folks out in the street? Like even our meetings, bi-weekly, whatever, plan for it.
Yeah, and each city's, the cities that do have street outreach workers have, I mean, you had city representation from there, and then the city of Largo was notified.
Okay, I didn't hear about these at all until now.
The chief of police.
Oh, wow, okay.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and I have 10 street outreach workers, right? I'm in Treasure Island, I'm in Gulfport, I'm at PST. I mean, I have 10 of them, and I didn't know about it either. So, right, so our street outreach, I have 10 street outreach for the homeless specifically dedicated to them on the streets. And so right?
So I was under the impression that you didn't have any anymore because the contract with the county went away. I didn't know.
Yeah, I gave back that contract for a variety of reasons, but that does not mean that we don't do street outreach. I have 10 street outreach staff who are literally on the streets every day. Treasure Island, Gulfport, PSTA, I mean, a variety of places.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I got a quick question. Lieutenant Hayes, you made a distinction about public versus private sleeping. So if somebody's sleeping behind, camping out or sleeping behind 7-Eleven versus my city park, what's the distinction about hauling them away or a report from a resident or business, like that's not allowed?
Private property is not mentioned in the statute that we're discussing.
So that means they can sleep behind a 7-Eleven?
That's not what I'm saying.
That has to go
private
through
property is not mentioned in the state statute that we're discussing.
That has to go through ordinance.
Yeah. Well, if the landowner, manager of the store wants them removed, then that's a different piece.
Trespass.
Okay.
But the state statute defines public property, and that's it. It's got nothing to do with private property.
Okay.
Nothing.
So if it's public property, but that still means it's a resident or anybody can call if they see it in a park, in my public park.
Yeah, but the law also calls for a 5-day cure period. So just because they call and say doesn't mean that the lawsuit gets filed the next day. The statute calls for a 5-day cure period. So the city, municipality, county jurisdiction, whatever it comes down to, has a period to reconcile the situation.
Overnight.
Correct. It's overnight sleep.
Yeah,
Correct.
so, you know, people in the park during the day is different.
Right.
Is overnight like dusk? I mean, what does that mean, overnight?
Right.
Tallahassee said overnight.
So that's not the time.
No, it's
We'll have people sleeping during the day and up all night.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd figure out a way. I'm just saying, I'd figure out a way.
I'm not sleeping. I'm wide awake. Okay, we have, we need to finish this motion. So we need to, yes.
No, I was doing
Okay, well, let's, so the motion, just as a reminder, because we made a couple additions, is to, for the COC to convene, HLA to convene a meeting with funders, providers, all hands on deck by the end of May. And all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passed. Moving on to our next agenda item, which is streamlining the funding process across jurisdictions. So information item, Charles, there's Chuck.
We had a meeting today with all of the local governments with CDBG applications. So there was Clearwater, Largo, in fact, Arrow organized the meeting. It's part of the county, right? We're talking about ways to try to align our things, our applications, our contracts, what we require for documentation, right? To make it easier on you all. And that's really what the entire focus is of this meeting. Now we're going to have several meetings because we I think today was very effective, but I think the initial goal right now we're all in our annual action planning process, right? And coming up, we're going to have to get into contracts with all the projects, right? That we selected. So we want those contracts to be the ones, the first set that are aligned with one another. So that's really kind of our goal. And then as we go on throughout the year, next January we'll also, it's Groundhog Day. We do it every year. We go through the same process. So before January, we'll try to align our applications so they're very similar, just to make things easier on you all. I think we can do a pretty good job of it. I don't think we can get everything perfectly aligned, but I think if we can at minimum get the structure of our contracts the same, our subrecipient agreements the same, really try to have relatively the same reporting requirements. We might have an agreement with DFL and county, you do the same thing for the county, and require different things. It just doesn't make any sense, right? So we might need some intervention from our HUD reps. All of us, you know, how many, what, 6 organizations? We had six different HUD reps.
That's right.
Right.
We've had 4 or 5 since COVID started.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean that's something we can't control. You know, with CDBG, we generally don't get conflicting guidance from our HUD reps. It's with the emergency programs because our HUD reps don't know any better than we do. Right. That's where we get the conflicts. But with CDBG, I think we can get on a pretty good level of alignment with our stuff. So that's the whole objective for what we're trying to achieve. And I think we're going to try to meet probably at minimum once a month until we really get where we need to get to. So, Aaron, you got anything to add?
One thing that we talked about that we'll try to do too is provide some helpful hints for applicants as to what will make your life easier. Like if you can use the funding, for example, for one case manager versus a position that splits and does 8 different things, you have a lot less paperwork to submit. Or if you even have other funding for the staff, but you need help with the water, utility, and food costs for your shelter, for example, it's way easier to submit a copy of a check showing you paid it, the invoice, and there you go, versus all the timesheets and this, that, and the other. So we're going to try and provide some helpful hints when you're thinking about what you want funding for that could make your life easier. The other thing that we found, I brought up the Housing First questionnaire and the standard HMIS language that we drafted years back. I'm going to send that to HLA to look at and see if anything needs to be updated on that. And we talked about a little bit about how we use that, but I think the point that I think those funders and providers looked at it was to try and get those standardized, that we're using those like the Housing First questionnaire in our application process, and everyone's got that HMIS data, coordinated entry type data or requirements in their contract, so that we're all supporting the you know, the outcomes of the COC overall. So I think those were probably the big takeaways.
So we've heard you all loud and clear. This is really in response to what you told us we needed. So any questions?
I don't really have a question. I just want to say thank you to you, Chuck, and to you, Arrow. I mean, because this did come out of one of the very first Provider Funder Council meetings that we had together. I am grateful to you for doing this. I do think, you know, kind of trying to look at unified funding strategies, you know, maybe not calling it a model, but, you know, kind of this consistent funding strategies is going to be extraordinarily helpful, not just to providers, but to the people we are missioned to serve. It will just get easier. And to Chuck's point, right, everybody has a different HUD rep, you know, tell them, you know, different things, and it makes it difficult, I'm assuming, even on your end. But I appreciate greatly that Arrow brought up Housing First, because I do think that we have to start with a Housing First, right? We all, you know, like signed in, you know, we all took the oath about Housing First here, like we all signed the big sheet of paper, and you know, sometimes it feels like it's not front and center. And so I appreciate that you want to bring that, you know, front and center in the conversation, is starting with Housing First and ultimately kind of streamlining our, you know, kind of unified funding. So I am greatly appreciative to both of you and to everybody who came together for your discussion today.
Thank you.
I second that.
All in favor?
All right. Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Chuck. All right, we're up to public comment.
I got one thing. So before all of this started, I'm going to pull back. I'm going to have to pull back from the Data and System Performance Committee as emergency shelter representative. I've been on it, I don't know, at least 8 years. So I think it's time for somebody else to represent. I will do my best to stick around until they have somebody. I won't be at the main meeting, I'll be away. But I'm putting it out to emergency shelter providers that somebody else is going to have to step up to the Data and System Performance Committee, because I was too busy before all of this happened. And now So I'm putting it out, any emergency shelter providers, Data System Performance Committee will be looking for new emergency shelter representation. I like doing it, but I can't.
Any takers? Maybe we could.
I think we should have a rule that says that you
Yeah.
can't vacate a seat until you fill the seat.
So to be fair, I vacated it about a year and a half ago. And
you have to vacate and then leave the building and not come back.
All right.
What's that like, Doug?
I'll show you how it's done.
So you're,
Yeah.
in essence, what you're saying is you're saying you're leaving, but you're not leaving because you never left.
Yeah, no, I can't anymore.
Can we put something out? Yeah.
I just want to say for the minutes, for the purposes of the minutes, that at a meeting that I believe we had, I think it was in October, and we had funding priorities that we were convening to discuss. Karen with County Human Services agreed to take that back. And I have been informed, and it's reflected in their minutes as well, that that they have funded an additional, or will be funding, I don't know if it's taken place already, for families shelter, an additional, I think, $400,000. So I just think for the minutes that we should acknowledge the county and how grateful we are for making that happen. I do also want to publicly acknowledge the Juvenile Welfare Board, who has done tremendous funding for a variety of programs, but specific to this topic, they are investing greatly in rapid rehousing for families with very, very generous policies. And so I just want to do a shout out to Beth Houghton in particular, but to the Juvenile Welfare Board as a whole for making that commitment to families.
Other, yes.
I wanted to, first of all, thanks to Mickey Thompson and 211 for letting us meet here today, but also a thank you to, and this is in particular the funders, thank you to my friend Chuck Lane for serving as the liaison with funders and providers and this council. So he is not the chair of funders. We are still looking for a chair of funders. I want to make that clear. And so just so you know, but a special thank you to Chuck.
Chuck. Anyone else? Public comment? Yes, Holly.
Just want to inform everyone that I am moving on to another position with the Salvation Army. I know after 8 years in this community, I'm going to a headquarters position in Atlanta. But for in terms of, who to reach out to, we do have our program director, DeAndre, who he will be the person to reach for homeless issues or also major stir demand. So thank you to everyone for working with you for all these years.
All right. Good luck to you, Holly.
Thank you.
That next journey. Yes, Helen.
I have an ask of the HLA. The report that we received, there's a few of us that received that shelter capacity report. If that could be sent out to share with others, providers and funders, so that everybody has the same information, is understanding what we're seeing, so that we can make sure it's correct.
Shelter capacity.
It's the shelter capacity report.
Yeah.
We did a help desk ticket and asked for it to be created because we knew this was coming, so we want to kind of understand what the capacity was. But I think if everybody had some access to it, then they could really, let's make sure that it's correct.
And let's make it sure it's correct before we send it to people for the end of May meeting, so that we're all looking at the correct data that's been double checked.
Danielle Thomas from the St. Pete Housing Authority is not here today, but she did ask me to share this with everybody. So up on the screen here, you can see Bear Creek Commons. That is going to be new affordable housing. Please make sure that people get on the pre-registration list because it will be starting soon. And I want to make sure that that gets shared on the COC's social medias by this weekend as well.
Thank you. Other public comment?
Can I ask just one question? I know we did the priority populations now, And I don't know if it's, can I ask that we do it in October?
Do it again in October?
Yeah, and here's the reason why. The reason why we're supposed to do it in October, and if we tried to, but it just didn't happen, is because we started doing our, municipalities started doing their budget at the beginning of the year. So I've already sent out like my social action funding's gonna open tomorrow. And I had to use the old priority populations because this has not been, it has to go before the board and it has to be approved and all those things, right? And so I had to use the old priority populations. If we do it at the joint funders council funders providers council that happens in October, then funders have that available to put on their for the priorities. And so it'll drive what our priorities are as we do our budgets. So we really need to do it in October.
I don't anticipate they're changing in October.
Right, well, that's what I was thinking, but
it might not, but
we could pull this, we could pull this one forward
and have that conversation.
Do we want to make any changes?
Yes. Right.
Yeah, I'm okay
because
with
maybe
that.
things might change by then, depending on, you know, what's happening, but we really need to have the conversation again.
Okay, yes. Anything else? Thank you, everyone. It is 3:06 and we'll call this meeting adjourned.
Thank you.